Coming up on this episode, the Golden State Warriors now sit alone atop the conference. I'll have a quick look around the West, plus a look ahead to Monday's game against the L.A Clippers. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you've all had a good weekend. Recording this in the final stages of the Clippers versus Jazz fourth quarter, where it looks like the Clippers will get their seventh win of the season. They're currently up 12 with 2 minutes to go. The Jazz have made a little bit of a comeback there, but it looks like the Clippers will get a win ahead of tomorrow's back-to-back against the Warriors. But a few good results for the Warriors today that has now seen them atop the NBA's Western Conference. Who would have thought? After 12 games, which I know is still, a short way through the season, but otherwise it's still notable. Of course, the Warriors are coming off a very tough stretch of games, winning games in Boston, Oklahoma City, Clay's homecoming, obviously, against the Mavericks, and even Friday's win over the Grizzlies is quite a notable one. They beat the Nuggets today, albeit they were without Nikola Jokic. But a couple of the other results, Minnesota, they had a comeback victory over the Phoenix Suns, who have now dropped a couple of games in a row without KD, of course. An incredible buzzer-beating three from Julius Randle to get the win there for them. The Suns starting both Mason Plumlee and Yusuf Nurkic. Not sure what is going on there and whether they're trying to time travel back to the 80s and 90s, but not sure that will work too much moving forward. Memphis, as I just spoke about, they beat the Nuggets 105-90. The Nuggets starting former Warrior Dario Saric at center in place of the Joker. I think us as Golden State fans would recognize that's probably not an ideal thing to do and probably isn't going to equate to too much success. So fingers crossed for the Nuggets that Joker is back soon. I think he might be out for personal reasons. Dallas, big upset win, needed it too. They now go to 7-7. They needed it because they've been struggling in recent games. Lost to Utah in Utah the other night. They beat OKC in OKC. I think the Thunder's only second home loss of the season after the Warriors, of course, beat them there. They also won without Luka, 121-119. That's a huge win when you consider no Luka. And, of course, Clay shot 1 of 11. I tell you what, apart from the homecoming game at Chase Center on Tuesday, Clay's struggling. He's really struggling. Did not play well against Utah the other night. He did not play at all in he did play the last 36 seconds, but aside from that was on the bench for basically 7 minutes to close the game before coming back in the final 36 seconds. So that was quite notable that Clay, do we call it like he got benched? I guess so. Jason Kidd didn't go back to him for a long period there in the fourth quarter, and he didn't shoot the ball overly well. And again, today goes 1 of 11 from the floor. How the Mavericks managed to beat the Thunder with no Luka and with Clay going 1 of 11, I'll never know, but they got some good performances elsewhere, including Kyrie Irving, who's having a great start to the season. And I tell you what, just another thing as well, we didn't make much of Golden State's massive win over Portland to open the season, or necessarily we did make a bit of their win over Houston, but that was more so the fact that the game itself and the fact the Warriors were up 30, Houston came back, forced it to overtime, and the Warriors got the win. But those two wins starting to look a lot better than what we probably thought at the time. Just in terms of the Trailblazers, I don't really like where they're going because they've got a lot of veteran players who probably just shouldn't be on the team and are making them better than what they probably would want to be in terms of, for their sake, trying to be a lottery team and trying to get Cooper Flagg and the number 1 overall pick. Jeremy Grant, guys like that. Their young guys are looking good. Shaedon Sharp's come back from injury and is looking fantastic. Donovan Clingan had a huge game against Rudy Gobert and the Timberwolves the other day. The fact they beat Minnesota twice in a row was extraordinary. But they win today as well. They beat the Atlanta Hawks and my man Dyson Daniels, who's quickly becoming my favorite non-Warrior, I would say. And then the Rockets smash Chicago. And so for the Warriors to win those two games, I think people will look mainly, obviously, at the recent form in terms of beating Boston, Oklahoma City, and Dallas, and Memphis as well. But some of the stuff they did early in the season that we kind of threw away as, that's an easy opponent. Houston are really, really good at the moment. And Portland aren't as bad as what that season opening matchup would have suggested. So the Warriors, their form continues to look pretty good compared to, in relation to what some of these other teams are doing around the league. Looking at the Western Conference standings right now, the Warriors all alone 10-2. Played 2 less games than OKC, who were 11-3, but of course the Warrior win percentage there has them on top. Rockets third, 10-4, looking really good. Very interesting to read the other day from ESPN's Tim Bontemps that the reporting around the league from scouts and executives is that Golden State and Houston are the 2 teams that are most likely at this stage to make a big splash on the trade market ahead of the February 6th deadline. What that looks like, we'll wait and see. NBA insider Mark Stein reported earlier today that the Rockets are very much a possibility for Giannis Antetokounmpo based on the relationship between Giannis and Hakeem Olajuwon and whether that could be a factor for the Rockets if Giannis becomes available at any point. We know he's the dream trade target for the Warriors and has been for a while. Again, the Warriors wouldn't really be able to match what the Rockets potentially could offer if Giannis becomes available. They've got about 9 first-round picks plus their young, talented guys. Makes it a little bit more difficult with like Jalen Green, Napa, and Şengün on poison pill contracts. But Houston's certainly in a situation here where they are absolutely primed to try and get a blockbuster trade done and not just be a playoff team in the West, which they look like right now, but actually some kind of championship contender probably earlier than what we expected. You think about the fact they've got this young core that are now 10-4 in the West. They've got young talent. They've probably got too much young talent to the point where they probably need to ship 1 or 2 out that actually have value. Like a guy like Cam Whitmore, he could go to another team and probably be a 15 to 20 point scorer, but doesn't really get a look in on Houston because of their young talent. Even a guy like Jabari Smith Jr., I think is kind of being shuffled back in terms of usage and what he could potentially do, even though he's a starter for the Rockets. So they've got the young talent and they've got the picks, as I just mentioned there, to try and go out and either get a guy like Giannis. We know they've been enamored with KD as well, so they are in a fantastic position. The Lakers, they've won 5 in a row. They're 9-4, looking quite good. Anthony Davis has been absolutely huge to start the season, as has LeBron, who had that 4 straight triple-doubles recently. AD's kind of revived his perimeter shooting a little bit, which is massive for them because he went a couple of years there where you just leave him. It's almost like Draymond. Draymond's revived his 3-point shooting for the Warriors. And Anthony Davis has done the same for the Lakers after a couple of years where both players, you could kind of leave them open from beyond the arc, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to make you pay. That has certainly changed so far this season. The Suns, they're 9-5, again, have lost a couple in a row here with no KD out with that calf injury. The Nuggets, they've also lost a couple in a row now without Jokic, 7-5. Again, depth a bit of a concern for them. The Wolves, the Grizzlies, and the Kings all 8-6. The Mavericks are 7-7. The Clippers are 7-7. The Spurs and the Trailblazers. Spurs 6-8. Frisky, like Wemby had obviously that 50-point game the other day. Huge, always a defensive presence. They pushed the Lakers in the NBA Cup game the other day. Trailblazers 5-8. Again, as I spoke about before, got some nice combination of veteran pieces and young players that has them, winning some games and beating good teams like Minnesota. So this Western Conference is stupidly competitive when you compare it to the East. And I mentioned on a podcast a couple of days ago, do we need to get to a situation here where it's just 1 through 16 playoff seedings rather than actually split it between the West and the East and 1 to 8 there in each of the conferences? Because right now, you look at 11 teams are above 500 in the Western Conference right now. 11 teams at 500 or above, right? In the East, there is 4. And 2 of those teams out of the 4 are the Magic, who are 8-6, and the Knicks, who are 7-6. Not really killing it. Like the Magic have a bit of an excuse with Paolo being out. The Knicks, still some question marks. Cat looks great, but like giving up 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges doesn't look overly ideal at the moment. So the fact you've got that disparity between the West and the East and the competitiveness and the talent level and the quality of these teams, it just it's bordering on unfair. I know it's how it is, and all sport there's different levels and different ranges of inequity to a degree. Like I know Australian rules football, it happens mainly in regard to the scheduling and the fact that you face half the teams twice almost, and then other teams only once, and who faces who twice and who faces who only once. Like there's so much inequity in sport that it's hard to get things as equal as possible. But when you've got a situation where it would be, I don't want to say simple, like it wouldn't be simple just to say, oh, 1 through 16 and go from there, because you've got all the travel stuff, and even during the playoffs, like you only have one day off between games, often in the first couple of rounds. Like it would be difficult in regard to the travel and therefore the financial cost of it and stuff like that. Like I get it, but I almost think that would be more preferable. And going forward, like there's going to be times as well where, in 10, 15 years when it's the opposite, where the East is like crying out and saying, hang on a second, we've got all these teams that are really good and above 500, and the West is really struggling and only has a few teams above 500. Like, that's fine. Like, make it a fair system where the best teams make the playoffs. And rather than have a team that is, below 500 make the playoffs, which is probably going to happen in the East. Like, you're going to have teams below 500 make the playoffs in the East. Meanwhile, teams 500 or above are going to be like 10th or 11th and battling just to make the playing tournament in the West. Like, what are we really doing here? So there's got to be a way around it. There's got to be more equality. And I don't want to push it and brush it off as, oh, well, this is just how it is. And so this is how it's always been kind of thing. So let's just keep rolling with it. And it'll change eventually to where, the East is far more competitive than the West. And I don't want to brush it aside just as that. Like, let's do something about it if we're the NBA. Like, come on. All right, let's move on to tomorrow's game between the Golden State Warriors and LA Clippers at the new Intuit Dome. Of course, the Warriors' first game there ever. Just some injury news for the Warriors, which isn't... some good news and some bad news. Good news, Lindy Waters III is questionable with that hyperextended knee from the second quarter against the Grizzlies the other night. Of course, he left the game late in the first half, did not return. There was some concern there. He was obviously down for a while, and then a bit more optimism when he was seen kind of running back into the locker room again. Wasn't seen again, but the Warriors have listed him as questionable, and Steve Kerr said that if he gets through early practice tomorrow, then he'll be good to go. Which is great news, because that kind of mechanism where you hyperextend your knee, that can be dangerous. As I said on the post-game live after the game the other day, I've done that before in a game of Australian rules football, fractured my patella, was about a 6-week recovery, and things can be a lot like that. People have torn their ACL or ruptured their ACL with that kind of mechanism and stuff as well, and that's like a year gone. So very, very fortunate and good news that I think Lindy Waters III has escaped any kind of injury there, really, or any kind of major injury, and the fact that he could potentially play tomorrow is a great sign. A couple of other players that are questionable, though. Steph Curry, knee bursitis. Obviously had not a heavy load the other day against the Grizzlies because he rested the fourth quarter, but the two games prior to that, where he went for 36 and 37 points against the Thunder and the Mavericks, whether that contributed to it at all, who knows? Doesn't seem like it's going to be a serious thing, and hopefully Steph can still play tomorrow. But needless to say, if Steph Curry is out of the lineup, then that's going to make things a lot tougher for the Warriors, no doubt about that. And then Kevon Looney's got a bit of an illness, a bit sick as well. Maybe picked up something from my basketball team, because we've got two players out through illness tomorrow as well. So that's a bit disappointing for Loon, who's been such an Iron Man for the Warriors over the past few years. When was the last time he was injured or he missed a game through injury or illness? Literally could not remember. Of course, he had that huge streak of over 250 games played in a row, and then it got cut short because Steve just didn't play him, and he was a DNP at one point, I think, last season. I think that's how it got broken, that streak. Melton is obviously out still with that ACL sprain. Still not really too much of an update in terms of a timetable on when he could return, which maybe is a little concerning just because of his injury history recently, and also the fact, like, all this testing and stuff. Maybe they needed to wait for the swelling to go down, and therefore they've had to wait for that. before getting testing, and that's kind of why the delay is in. But if there's a delay on like a timetable of return here and there's not too many details coming out about it, that usually makes me feel like pessimistic rather than optimistic on what the severity of the injury is. So I don't know. Fingers crossed. But it's going to be interesting to see what the Warriors do without Melton, and if Lindy Waters III is out. We saw Waters start the game against the Grizzlies on Friday, which was really, really interesting because he was kind of probably sixth in line for me to replace Melton and be the starting two guard next to Steph, but he kind of catapulted his way from out of the rotation to in the starting lineup over the likes of Moses Moody, Gary Payton II, Kuminga if they wanted to go big, Pods obviously, who then started the second half in place of Waters. So it'll be interesting to see what Steve does if Waters is out. I think I would go with Moody, but that would have been my initial thought as well when Melton was initially out. So I don't know, is the fact that Pod started the second half the other day, is that a sign of who would start if Waters is out tomorrow? I don't necessarily think so. I still think that Pods, they prefer him backing up Steph as the point guard rather than necessarily playing alongside him. Obviously, if Steph's out, then that is a guarantee that the Pods will start at the point. But otherwise, Moody, obviously an option. In that Clippers game late last month, Kuminga started in that bigger lineup with Wiggins at the 2. You could potentially throw GP2 out there to try and combat the perimeter threat of Harden and Norman Powell, but I don't think, I just don't like that. I know Draymond's shooting the ball a lot better this season, but the lack of spacing between GP2, Draymond, and Looney, I've said it before, I don't really like that. I don't want to see GP2 starting. He's more of a defensive punch off the bench, playing 10, 15 minutes rather than in a starting role. That's just my opinion, though. So I would go with Moody, but again, I thought that was going to be the case against the Grizzlies, and instead Waters came from out of the rotation to starting. So fingers crossed Lindy's good to go, and maybe he gets the start again, and Steve goes 11 or 12 deep into this rotation. But if we go back to that game late last month, I think it was October 27th, I think it was, the first loss of the season for the Warriors and one of only two so far for the season. The Clippers won 112-104, and the Clipper defense was absolutely exceptional. It was one of the times the Warriors have really struggled so far this season. The fact that Golden State are fourth in offensive rating, that's almost more of a surprise to me than their defense. Like we heard before the season, the Warriors wanted to be top 5 or top 7 in defense. They've done that. They're fourth in defense as well right now. But I think you could have, if you told me after 12 games that the Warriors would be fourth in offense or fourth in defense, I would have been more surprised at the offensive part of it, because I think you could see prior to the season that, okay, yeah, they've actually got the tools, they've actually got the versatility, they've got the players to be a very good and elite defensive team, and they were very vocal in wanting to be that. And so you could have easily talked me into, they've achieved their goal of being a top 5 defensive team. That doesn't really surprise me as much as it has drawn headlines for how good they've been defensively. But I think offensively, if you told me they're fourth, I would have thought, really? Only one genuine star. And if you told me they were fourth with Steph missing 3 games and 3 in a big games, if you think about the fact that he got injured in that initial Clippers game, that is a huge surprise. And obviously, the bench, the depth of scoring, someone like Buddy Hield going completely off and going bonkers, and the fact that he's having a better season than both Paul George and Larry Markkinen, who, if the Warriors had their way, those guys would be in a Warrior uniform right now playing in the Bay. The fact that Buddy Hield's just flat out been better than those guys is quite a shock, and certainly contributes to the fact that the Warriors have been able to have the 4th best offense in the league so far, which I'm not sure that's going to be able to maintain. I think the defense can. I think the defense could potentially get better and be even top 3 in the league. The offense, I don't know. Fingers crossed. Hopefully it can maintain its top 10, I think, ideally. Because if the Warriors are, top 4 in defense, top 10 in offense, that still means they're going to be an elite team. I don't know. Is it sustainable to be 4th in offense? We'll wait and see. But one of the games that really did struggle was obviously that first Clippers meeting. Clippers applied a lot of pressure, forced the Warriors into 21 turnovers. And I think that's the thing that's going really underrated in terms of not only just the offense, but the key element here and a common theme throughout the entire Steve Kerr coached Warriors throughout the past decade. When the Warriors lose, it's generally because they throw the ball all over the gym and give the ball away a plethora of times, right? 20, 25 times. That's generally when they lose. And we saw in that first Clippers matchup, the Warriors turned it over 21 times. They kept a 32.6% shooting from 3-point range. The defense was okay, kept the Clippers to 112, that's fine. But of course, the offense just wasn't good enough, right? And again, credit to the Clipper defense for that. But overall on the season, if you look at the turnover stuff, it's really going under the radar. The fact that the Warriors have kind of fixed their turnover woes to start the season. So a few numbers here from that. They're 6th in assist to turnover ratio, previously 11th and 13th in the last 2 seasons. They're 13th in turnover percentage, 22nd and 29th in each of the last 2 seasons in that stat. And then just turnovers per game, they're 13th, and they were previously 23rd last season and 30th the year before. They were dead last in 2022-23. And so the Warriors still turn the ball over a bit. They're in no means elite. They're in no means not giving the ball up at anywhere like an elite rate, like top 5 in the league. But they're never going to be because they run a system where the ball moves so much, and it's not isolation stuff. It's not even just simple pick and roll stuff where that's where you're going to be a team where you only have single digit turnovers kind of thing, and you don't give the ball away as much. So the fact that they're at league average, 6 in assist to turnover ratio, they're always going to be somewhat high-ish in that because they do get so many assists. But 13th in turnover percentage and 13th in turnovers per game, that's really good for the Warriors. It might not seem great because it's just above league average, but for the Warriors and the way they play, that is elite. That is fantastic. And again, up from turnovers per game up from 23rd and 30th in the last 2 years. And this has been a huge element, I think, in the fact that now 10-2 through 12 games. The fact you're not turning the ball over as much just gives you obviously gives you more shot attempts, just gives you a much better chance of winning the game. And again, I think they're averaging just over 14 turnovers per game, which again, it's not elite, but it's fine. For the Warriors, it's really good. And then in the 2 losses, they've had 21 turnovers against the Clippers, and then I think it was 17 turnovers against the Cavs, which is, that wasn't really the issue. It was more so the fact that the Cavs just flat out couldn't miss on their side of the floor in the first half. It was still one of the hottest shooting stretches we've seen in the season to date so far. So that's going to be key for the Warriors, obviously, tomorrow is, not turning the ball over, getting as many looks as they possibly can, and a lot of the dumb ones as well, and obviously a lot of the live ball ones as well, where the Clippers can get out in transition, and they do have some rangy, athletic wings like the likes of Terrence Mann, Derrick Jones Jr., who, if they get out and running, can be dangerous if you do turn the ball over. Just in terms of the offense as well, Steph, before he got injured in that first game against the Clippers, they were doing a fantastic job. And Ty Lue always seems to worry me when it comes to going against the Clippers and him and how he manages to limit Steph a little bit. Now, in saying that, I think the last time before this season, last season, the Warriors played the Clippers, I think Steph went for 40. But generally, I think the Clippers do a pretty good job of denying Steph too many field goal attempts. If you look at recent history aside from that 40-point game that Steph had, and again in that game late last month, he had 11 field goal attempts in 27 minutes, which I did the averages of Steph per 36, and then took the numbers off to kind of equate to that 27-minute mark. Usually, every 27 minutes of play, Steph averages about 15 field goal attempts. And so he took 4 less field goal attempts in that game at the start of the season compared to what he generally and normally does. So that's, I think, a watch is like, can the Warriors get Steph going, and particularly get Steph going early? Because we even saw, like, against the Grizzlies the other night, like, I don't know, he's having these. I'm not even sure it's a this season issue. I think it's generally like it happens quite a bit where he just starts slow, where he's just not even looking for his own shot, where he's looking to get other guys involved. And so many times I think as fans, it's like, no, Steph, like, you just go off. You just go off, you get going, you get in a rhythm, you get the momentum up, you get the crowd going if you're playing at Chase Center, and then bring your teammates into the game, rather than bring your teammates into the game and then go the other way, bring your teammates into the game and then go off yourself, which has still worked for the Warriors. Like, we've seen what he did in those fourth quarters against the Thunder, and then most notably against the Mavericks, where he just went off in those last few minutes. So I'd still like to see Steph get going a little bit more in the first quarter. I thought he was really not passive, but I suppose just relented to the pressure and the aggressiveness of the Grizzly defense on him individually in the first quarter. Now, it still worked for the Warriors. They found themselves up by, one at the end of the first quarter, 7 at halftime, and then built a double-digit lead pretty quickly in the second half. So it's working, don't get me wrong, but I still think as fans sometimes you see, you come out and you're seeing, Draymond corner threes and Wiggins pull up jump shots, and you're like, can we just try and get Steph a few looks here early? I don't know. It's just an interesting watch to me coming up against the Clippers, who Tyler Lue generally does a pretty good job schematically, and then a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. as well has become known for his perimeter defense with what he was able to do with a Mavericks team that got to the finals last season. So that's going to be super interesting. On the other end of the floor, huge watch for me is Trayce Jackson-Davis. A couple of times so far this season, going back to the first preseason game, and then obviously that first matchup with the Clippers in the regular season, absolutely torched by Ivica Zubac. Absolutely obliterated. Zubac went for 23, 18, 6 assists, 2 steals in that previous matchup. He was the difference, really, from a Clippers standpoint. I know Harden went for 20 plus and Norman Powell went for 20 plus as well, but Zubac was such a presence on both ends of the floor. And I think that was he was the player of the game for them in that one. And the Warriors need to find a way to negate his impact on both ends. And I think it could be difficult to stop him from eating up rebounds and getting on the end of some pick and roll, his pick and roll partnership with Harden and finishing at the rim. Could be really difficult because he's just too big. Like, the Warriors just don't have anyone of that size to go up against him. And TJD could get eaten alive again. Looney maybe a bit more stout in terms of, if Zubac's in the post and going to those little jump hooks and stuff like that. Maybe Looney's a bit better in those kind of situations, but still giving up some inches height-wise. And then really, maybe their best option is to actually go super small and try and exploit Zubac on the other end of the floor, where we know he's a really good rim protector. He can block shots. Can he come out onto the perimeter? Can you drag him out onto the perimeter? Maybe go, 5 out spacing wise and see if, he wants to close out to Draymond on a corner 3. And then if he doesn't, well, Draymond shooting 45% from 3 this season, could come back to haunt. Maybe, run a heap of pick and roll, Steph Draymond pick and roll. See if Zubac wants to come up to the level of the screen, or if he just wants to be in drop coverage. That kind of thing. Try and test him as much defensively as you can, and the best way of doing that may be by going small with Draymond at the 5, or even Kyle Anderson at the 5, who has shown himself capable of hitting perimeter shots so far this season to various success from game to game, but he's capable of, if they want to leave him wide open, Kyle Anderson, it wouldn't surprise me if he goes 2 of 3 or 3 of 4 from deep. But also wouldn't surprise me if he went 0 of 4 or 0 of 5. He's had a couple of games with contrasting fortunes this season, but that would probably be if Zubac is just killing it on the Clippers, on the offensive side of the floor for the Clippers, and the Warriors have no answer. Their best answer might be, okay, we'll try and do what we can, but we'll understand that he's probably going to eat us alive on that end. Let's try and exploit him on the defensive side of the ball for the Clippers by going smaller, by spacing out, and trying to test him as much defensively as possible. So that's my biggest watch. Ideally, Trace just gives a much better account of himself in that individual matchup. And it doesn't get to a point where the Warriors really have to think a whole lot about what kind of lineups and rotations they're putting on the floor. Because if you, like, I like Zoo, I think he's a great player, but if you're having to kind of, as an opposition team, if you're kind of having to create and organize your lineups and rotations based on Ivica Zubac, you might be in some trouble. But that's also just the reality of this Warrior roster, where they don't have a 7-foot guy who can just go straight up against him and match him size for size. So that's going to be fascinating. Warriors are currently 2.5-point favorites for this one. The Clippers game's just, let's just double checking they actually won that game. Yes, they won 116-105. So again, they're 7-7. 2.5-point favorites. That doesn't really say too much right now because we don't know what the Clippers are going to do with their injury report, and the 2.5 points kind of is a Steph thing as well. Like, once Steph is confirmed to play, you'd imagine that would maybe extend to 4.5 or 5.5. Look, at the end of the day, it's a game the Warriors should be winning. They should be getting revenge for their loss to the Clippers earlier in the season. They are just a better team than the Clippers, I would say, but they also have some issues with the Clippers. And again, I think Ty Lue does a pretty good job generally against Steve Kerr from a schematic standpoint. So I'm certainly not penciling it in as a win. But Golden State, like, they've got a pretty good run coming up here with the schedule, and they can, it might be a surprise now that they're first and on top of the Western Conference after 12 games, but it also wouldn't surprise me if they're still on top, 20 to 25 games through the season, either just in regard to their schedule coming up and a few of the injuries that other teams have got in the way of, KD injured at the Suns. Obviously, the Thunder having no real center right now, although it sounds like Hartenstein is going to be back fairly soon. And then, a couple of, the injury crisis across the league is really disappointing. The Warriors are starting to feel that as well, with three guys questionable tomorrow. And of course, Melton already out. Other than that, guys, not too much else. Looking forward to the matchup tomorrow. I'll be back for a post-game live after that, so feel free to come in and I'll read your comments out on the stream. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252, that's POK252 on X/Twitter. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Golden State with Mates. If you can't make the post-game live, you'll be able to watch it obviously afterwards on YouTube or on the podcast feed. Other than that, guys, hope you have a great start to your week.